Freudian/Jungian model, that there is a portion of our mental life called the unconscious, which is hidden from the ordinary inspection of the conscious mind, and that on psychedelics you access portions of this. In the Freudian variety, it's all about repressed sexual stuff and wish fulfillment and what he called day residues, meaning jumbled memories of recent experience. I think the Jung, except in the case of LSD, which is a rather Freudian drug, actually. In other words, you do recover memories of childhood episodes of abuse, and you do realize that you've been treating people badly and so forth. It seems addressed to the psychodynamics of the self. The Jungian model is a broader model because it says, again, countervailing these geneticists who say DNA only contains protein sequencing information. The Jungians want to say that there is a race memory, a collective unconscious, that you can go deep into the self and reach beyond personal memory and personal trauma to racial memory and racial trauma, and ultimately, by a process of following these genetic trees, all life, all of the Gaian biosphere becomes available. So that's another model. A model that is closer to my presupposition, but not sufficiently formal, is shamanism. Shamanism, as probably most of you know, is the worldwide Paleolithic religion of ecstasis and magical curing. That is how religion was practiced for the first million years, before weasels got hold of it, and substituted dogma for experience. I mean, that's the real difference between shamanism and other religious enterprises. There is no such thing as shamanic theology. Shamanism is experience. And I, for a long time, found that the most satisfying model. It's even though shamanism is archaic in a sense, that's almost a science fiction model, because what the shamanic model is saying is that there is a parallel universe or universes of some sort, and that you can, by ascending some kind of cosmic axis, it differs from culture to culture. It's like an elevator in reality. You discover there are these different planes you can visit and acquire power and cut deals and become a curer and transcend cultural limitation. The model that I've come to favor, that is more radical, I guess, in its implications, because it takes the phenomenon more seriously, is the model that is largely mathematical. In other words, saying that the proper way to talk about the psychedelic experience is in the vocabulary of non-Euclidean and higher plane geometry. The notion being something like this, that the mind is a multidimensional manifold of some sort, but it takes the shape of its vessel in the same way that a liquid takes the shape of its vessel. And because we are animals of meat and sinew, the circumstance into which mind must pour itself is a situation of evolutionary competition and constant threat. And so in our species, mind has developed into a kind of all-purpose threat detection device. The correlation of intelligence and paranoia is hard to prove. So What mind does for us is it's constantly calculating the odds of danger and physical attack and strategy of response and so forth and so on. But that is not the essence of mind. That is the response of mind to being contained or constrained by this lower dimensional space. And when you take a psychedelic in silent darkness, where there's no extraneous parameters forcing themselves in upon you, the mind unfolds itself. Or another way to think of it would be, there are certain compounds in organic and inorganic chemistry that have more than one crystal formation. At a certain temperature, they crystallize and have a certain crystalline geometry. But if you keep raising the temperature, sulfur will do this, for example. It reliquefies. Then at a yet higher temperature, it recrystallizes again. This is how I think of mind, that put through the crucible of the psychedelic experience, and I use this kind of alchemical terminology deliberately, put through the crucible of the psychedelic experience, the mind becomes fluid and then is recast in a higher dimensional manifold. This is why, you see, what's always claimed of shamanism by shamans is that they violate ordinary causality. And what that means is they can see who stole the chicken, or who ran away with the game, or who's philandering who. Now anthropologists dismiss this and say, oh, these people are naive about causality and understanding categories and so forth and so on. But that's not what's happening. They actually do these things. Anybody who spends time with shamans will become aware, not of spectacular magic, not of, Carlos Castaneda-style dances in the waterfalls and appearing 500 miles away from where you started 10 minutes later, but a very subtle kind of magic, all of which can be reduced to that these people have a slight hyperspatiality to their relationship to time. In the ordinary experience is a point-like experience of the now. These shamans seem to diffuse their consciousness and are actually running slightly ahead of everybody else. This is why shamans are always associated with weather prediction. Because you only have to have a leg up 24 hours to do spectacular weather prediction. This is why shamans know where the game went, because they see where the game went. And it doesn't seem that far-fetched when you think about the fact that, from one point of view, all biology is about the conquest of dimensionality. This is a statement that is consistent from ourselves sitting here this evening down to the first protobiotic slimes on clay banks in the Archaeozoic. Life conquers dimensions. The earliest forms of life were fixed in space. They were point-like. They had no organs of sense at all. Then what came was motility, but still no extended perceptors. Life literally felt its way. Then light-sensitive pigmentation sequestered itself on the surfaces of primitive organisms, and they established a light gradient, a sense of here and there. Notice that to have a sense of here and there, you have to have a sense of time, which is another dimension. You are claiming that dimension and integrating it into your description of the world. Higher order animals simply build on that conquest of spatiality. In until you get to advanced, highly advanced primates. And then you get language. And language is clearly a strategy for escaping from the point-like nature of the present. Because with language, you can command the past, and you can strategically anticipate the future. So your existence is extended in a geometric sense. Now, I think this in the same way that you all know the cliche ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, in that spirit, then, culture is now recapitulating the individual journey toward hyperdimensionality. And culture is about to go hyperdimensional. That's what is creating the crisis at the end of history. The reason history is ending is because it's a linear ending, and it's about to be phased out. Psychedelics make all of this operationally potentized, usable. In other words, it isn't just simply a rap of some sort. It's a roadmap. It's a way of relating to reality. And as the weekend goes forward, we'll explore the implications of this for ourselves personally, as a tool for personal growth, and as a cultural metaphor, which is sort of what I have tried to bring to the psychedelic thing that other people haven't. Ultimately, I see it as a culture-transforming engine. But of course, the elements of culture are individuals, and to the degree that individuals psychedelicize themselves, they force this process forward into completion. And I feel that there's a certain urgency about this, or there may be a certain urgency about it. In any case, it has a moral imperative, which may sound strange since it's illegal and vague against and excoriated as vice and degradation. But nevertheless, if consciousness doesn't loom large in the human future, then it is not a human future. You know, nature is looking with hard eyes at this little experiment launched with the melting of the glaciers. We consider the dinosaurs a failure. For 100 million years, they were the masters of the planet. We've pulled our act together in the last million years, and we're already staring extinction in the face. And yet, the enterprise of intelligence is without precedent in the organic world. I mean, where are you going to get Milton? Where are you going to get Einstein? Where are you going to get Bach and Duccio and all the rest of the gang out of a world of hummingbirds, chipmunks, and glaciers? So I don't think we should sell ourselves short. We are not epiphenomenal. We are the trigger species on this planet. We are now basically directing and impacting on the entire bio of the planet. The implications of this have yet to be worked out. We don't know whether we're witnessing a rush toward extinction or whether we are setting ourselves up for a leap into a higher order of reality. Psychedelics, I think, exist not only to birth this process, but to also assuage the anxiety that is connected with it, because it is a phase transition of major magnitude. I don't think it's the yawning grave, but I also don't think you're going to take your Ferrari with you. It's going to be tight indeed getting through this narrow neck, and what lies beyond it is as incomprehensible to us as a future life as a collector of mogul miniatures and stockbrokering would be to a fetus trapped in the birth canal. You know, when you're trapped in the birth canal, it just looks like suffocation, strangulation, termination, death. You cannot conceive that it is a necessary initiation to a higher order of existence.
Yes.
Regarding, you said last night, today touched on basically somebody, you raised the question, which I have, on the missionary's role in the communication process, and basically gave us an answer. So
Oh.
I asked the question.
Okay. Yes, well, the book that I did for Bantam called Food of the Gods, I sort of thought of as a Trojan horse for anthropology, because I had a conscious political agenda, which was I wanted to insinuate the notion of psychedelics as necessary to human evolution. I wanted to insinuate that idea of orthodox anthropology and primate evolutionary theory. So I wrote a book addressed to the larger world, in other words, in an academic style with footnotes and so forth and so on, arguing that the way to account for our peculiar predicament in nature, in other words, that we are obviously some kind of animal, but yet carrying this enormous proclivity for code generation and manipulation of material. I mean, we are literally the idea-excreting animal. We don't make honeycombs and coral reefs. We make transistors and automobiles and skyscrapers and aircraft and all of this stuff. That our predicament in nature can only be explained by some extraordinary confluence of unusual forces. And orthodox evolutionary theory, when it comes to human emergence, basically fails. Nobody has a clue because it happened so quickly. The human brain doubled in size in 1.5 million years. The anthropologist, evolutionary biologist Lumholtz calls this the most dramatic modification of a major organ of a higher animal in the entire fossil record. And it cannot be explained by evolutionary theory as Darwinian theory as modified by molecular genetics, to the great embarrassment of these concerns, because it is, after all, the organ which generated this theory. A point not to be lost sight of, you see. So my notion was that there must have been an extraordinary catalytic interaction of some sort that had to be driven by some kind of factor in the environment. And bipedalism, binocular vision, incipient language, complex pack signaling, all of this comes together at a moment of dietary crisis in our remote ancestors, because as we left the arboreal canopy of the climaxed rainforests, which were under climatological retreat at that time, that's why we were leaving, we had to switch our diet from being fruitarian and insectivorous. There was suddenly, that was all very difficult to obtain. And the bit in nature is that animals tend to specialize foods as a strategy for avoiding mutagenic influence in the environment. In other words, if you only eat one thing and you have enzyme systems designed to guard you against any toxin present in that food, then you can hold the level of chemically induced mutation to a low level. If you're an omnivore, you're at high risk for toxicologically induced mutational stress. And when we went into this food experimental phase, one of the foods that we surely would have encountered was psilocybin mushrooms, because ungulate animals, proto-cattle, were evolving in the same African grassland environment. Psilocybin, to my mind, is uniquely positioned environmentally and pharmacologically to be the trigger enzyme for this induction of consciousness into this advanced advanced hominid. The reasons are that, well, the first reason is purely physiological, that low doses of psilocybin increase visual acuity. And this would have tremendous impact on an animal that was surviving through predation. On low doses of psilocybin, your sensitivity to edge detection, which means movement of an animal in a grassland environment at a distance, is up to 20% more sensitive than in an unstoned human being. The guy who discovered this, Roland Fisher, said to me when I discussed it with him, he said, so you see, here is a case where taking a drug definitely gives you a more accurate picture of reality than if you had avoided the drug. It's just a perfect proof of it. Well, at higher doses, psilocybin induces group sexual activity, orgy, because it causes arousal. If any of you are primatologists, you probably know that we are very closely related to chimpanzees, and that then there is a second set of chimpanzees, a species or subspecies, there's argument about it, called bonobos. And the sexual style of these two brands of chimpanzees could hardly be more different. The ordinary chimpanzee is all about male dominance, female control, suppression of homosexuality, just the bit. And the bonobos are like polymorphically sexual and pansexual and just, a complete ongoing party all the time. And the genetic difference between these two species is very, very slight, but the behavioral difference is tremendous. And more, as you approach the realm of consciousness, behavior becomes what is being modified rather than the physical expression. The third is, that behaviors are modified, but organs and general physical presentation isn't. And the third level of catalytic action by psilocybin in terms of evolution is that it triggers cognition, whatever that means. It also triggers glossolalia, spontaneous displays of language-like activity. And I imagine that the secret to understanding the emergence of language is to realize that language was fully developed before meaning was attached to it. That it's an abstract expressionist activity for most of the history of its use. And only in the past 50,000 years or so has it been enslaved to the concept of symbolic activity. The mystery of our position in nature has to do with the fact that, let me put it this way, all primates, clear back to squirrel monkeys and lemurs, have dominance hierarchies, male dominance hierarchies. What this means is that the young, hard-bodied, long-fanged males control everybody, the elderly, the females, the young, homosexuals. Everybody is under the control. And what happened to us as a species, by design or accident, is another issue which we can discuss. But what happened to us is that for perhaps as long as 1 million years, by including psilocybin in the diet, we inhibited this tendency to form these dominance hierarchies. That's what the group sex was all about. It represents a boundary dissolution. You see, in an orgiastic society, lines of male paternity cannot be traced. Consequently, men do not own children in those kinds of societies. The loyalty of men goes to the group, the children of the group, and it forms a much more cohesive social mind, if you will. We functioned like this for perhaps 150,000 years in the light of consciousness. What was happening on the African plain was a slow migration of behaviors and habits toward the domestication of cattle. It began, you see, with our truly primitive hominid ancestors probably just following along behind these large herds of ungulate animals, living on lion kills and stuff like that. But by what following along behind cattle means is a familiarity with manure. And what that means is mushrooms in a tropical grassland environment. And over the millennia, the cattle, the mushrooms, and the human beings were drawn into a tighter and tighter symbiosis, so that at the melting of the last glaciers 22,000 years ago, from then until about 10,000 BC, what you actually had was a kind of partnership paradise, and the actual moment of human archaic fulfillment, when men and women and human beings and the environment and everything was in balance for perhaps 10,000 years. And in that period, and it was not dramatic, I don't mean to imply that, it was a process stretched out over the last 100,000 years. In that period, the things that make us most human and most different from animal existence were put in place. Things like music, art, altruism, theater, dance, poetry, play, technology, all of these things came into being. Well then, when the mushroom religion faded and human populations blossomed out over the planet and the Sahara turned dry and the cradle was empty, these pharmacologically suppressed patterns of male dominance reasserted themselves. I mean, there was literally a reversion to a set of behaviors that had been chemically suppressed for a very, very long time. And you get then control of women by men, classism, xenophobia, warfare, the whole set of screwball institutions that have pushed us to the brink of Armageddon come into play right then, when we grew beyond the bounds of this symbiotic relation with psilocybin. So that was the end.
There's some great medical school now. Is that correct? Is that what do you call these? That's
Bonubo.
Where psilocybin is representations?
No. None of these primates are grassland creatures. This was a unique human thing, probably because what happened was the forest environments in which we were at climax turned into islands, and the only environment available, they were islanded by grassland, the only environment available, and as the resource space in the canopy shrank, there was real pressure to explore this new environment.